Do you love to make things but don't want to spend a lot of money on materials or tools? This might be the place for you. Welcome to CT&HG, cardboard, tape, and hot glue. I've got a few things that just don't see the light of day enough. Shall we call them sticks of a somewhat magical nature? I have a small collection. Unfortunately, they spend all of their time either just sitting in boxes or sitting on shelves open, out of the way, or being broken in half because the advertised iron rod that was supposed to be in the middle wasn't actually, and I got my money back for that one. But they would definitely look better displayed somewhere and in one piece. Gotta glue that one. So for my second CT&HG project, it is time to make a display stand. I have seen multiple ones advertised on different sites, mostly AliExpress honestly, and they're cheap, plastic, and well, they look cheap and plastic. And I figure with some cardboard, tape, and hot glue, I can't do worse. We bought a Zojitsu hot plate set a while back, and I kept the box because this is the thinnest, I call it 5-ply, but I've also heard it called double corrugated cardboard, that I've ever seen, and I thought this project would be a perfect place to use it. I was having trouble deciding where this project should fall on the decorative to functional scale when I noticed this doesn't say functional, I made it practical. Is it practical? Well, I mean, I guess so. It works for what it's intended to, but it is a decorative item. Its function is to be decorative, so that really puts it over toward the decorative. With no other function, I'm putting it 100% over to decorative. First step, design. I tried sketching out several different display stand styles, some smoother, some more angular, some that would hold 2 wands, some that would hold 3. Pretty much the first one I did was the best. Once I had my design finalized, I had to very carefully cut it out of the paper and block the camera with my head for most of that process. Once I had my template cut out, I had to very slowly and carefully trace that onto the cardboard because the paper template is so flimsy it's very easy to mess it up. And I even managed to level up my camera head blocking game. Step 2, cutting. It may seem strange that I purposefully chose a thin cardboard to make this out of and then went and made 4 copies of the sides, but I think using double layers of this thinner double corrugated cardboard actually gives a lot more strength than using a single layer of thicker packing material double corrugated cardboard. At least that's what I'm telling myself. I realized the pencil marks on cardboard were pretty hard to see on camera, so just for the one I was recording cutting out, I traced the lines in black marker just to make it a lot easier to see. And then blocked the camera with my head to make it harder to see. I used the size of the wands that are going to be displayed and the size of the sides I'd already made to choose a size for the base. I settled on 25 centimeters by 16 centimeters. I cut out 2 copies of the base with the corrugation running 90 degrees to each other so that when they're glued together they'll be extra strong. I used the sides and one of the wands to get a feel for how wide it would be so I would know how wide to make the crossbars that will give the stand its stability. For my design they ended up being 19.5 centimeters. So of course I cut 2 identical pieces to be the bottom crossbeam, I guess we'll call it, and 2 smaller ones to be the top crossbeam. I decided to make the top crossbeam just a simple plain bar, but the bottom I thought a little bit more shape would look better. I could have gone fancier on the top, but it wasn't really necessary. It might take some focus away from the wands. The last thing I needed to cut out was the display stand feet. I decided to make them 4 centimeters wide and just over 19 centimeters long so they stick out a little bit in front and back. I used a 1 yen coin to trace a curve on the top corner of the stand's sides just to give it a little bit more shape. Unfortunately, it looks like I failed to record the other parts of the feet being cut. Time for step 3, assembly. Now that I've got all the pieces cut, it's time to warm up the hot glue. You know, usually when I make a cardboard project, there are no well-defined step 1, step 2, step 3. It's just make things up as I go along. This is much more organized than usual. I guess before the assembly there was actually a fair bit of pre-assembly where I had to double-check measurements and everything and figure out where exactly everything was going to get stuck. With all the measurements and markings out of the way, the hot gluing can finally begin, starting with the baseboard. Times like this where I have to glue fairly large areas of cardboard together, I do wish I had a more expensive hot glue gun that could output a much larger volume of hot glue all in one shot. Even so, I managed to make do with my Daiso cheapo hot glue gun. I generally like to hold down freshly glued pieces to give them a fair bit of time to cool off, to try and prevent any warping, especially a piece like this that I want to keep as flat as possible. Now if I had something like a laser cutter, each piece would come out perfectly identical, but since everything's cut by hand, nothing is identical and there are variations, so I had to choose which pieces went best together, and then get the hot glue on it as quick as possible and get them together, hold them down until they're cool and stay straight and flat. The bottom plate, the side pieces, and both cross braces were simply gluing together identical pieces. The only part that required a bit of construction were the feet. I made a simple box, no double layer cardboard was needed for this, just a few internal cross braces to give it strength. Assembling all the pieces into the stand's final shape was actually the easiest part of the whole process. Gluing the feet on the bottom went very smooth, and I just had to cut a few rectangles, bend them onto the ends of the feet to give them a nice curved shape, then figure out exactly where I was going to position each of the side pieces and the cross braces, mark it off on the base just to get it nice and perfect-ish, glue the sides of the base, glue the bottom cross brace in, then figure out exactly where I wanted to put the upper cross brace, glue it in, and then afterwards notice I got it a little bit off-center, off-line, diagonal, not straight, not good enough, oh well. Step 4, skinning. By which, of course, I mean putting a skin on the project, not taking one off. And this is where I made a big mistake. This should have been the third step, and assembly should have been the last step, but I thought the tape would get in the way, I'd have to cut off a layer of tape anywhere I wanted to put glue, and I didn't want to go through that, and that actually would have been the easier way to do it. It would have saved so much frustration. As it was, instead of nice flat objects I could have worked with fairly easily, I had this 3D stand that I had to figure out ways to try and get tape into every corner and around every curve and not make it look horrible, which I didn't. The flattest parts, the base, I got easily, that didn't take too long, but then when it came time to do the sides, I put the tape on one side, kind of roughly cut out the shapes, and then put cuts in it to fold it over and around the other side. That's where the problem came in. Folding it over and covering the other side with tape is normally okay, but this time, because the shape was so odd, the tape got folded over again and again and layered up 2 or 3 deep in some places where there would be a curve, and when you put another layer of tape over it on the other side, it looked terrible. So I had to spend a lot of time undoing all my work, cutting off tape, pulling off tape, trying not to rip apart the cardboard as I pulled off tape, and then trimming down the excess flaps of tape that were just making the other side look horrible. I didn't record most of this. I spent a lot of time on it, and it was a lot of frustration, and I just wanted to get that part done. Once I had skinned both sides of the side pieces, I had to do the edges, which I measured to be about 9mm. So I cut 9mm thin strips to cover all the exposed corrugated edges. Now, since the tape is going onto the corrugated edge, there's not a lot of surface area for the tape's adhesive to stick to, which is its own problem. They're not sticking very well in some spots. I'm probably going to have to go back and put some CA glue on to hold them down. With the edges covered, there were just a few small spots left, like front and back, bottom of the feet. Just took a bit of measurement, cut the tape to the right size, cover them over. It was done pretty quickly. There were a few spots that weren't quite covered with tape, and I didn't want to put more tape on and put more layers on and make more lumpy bits, so I took a black marker and colored in whatever was still exposed. I'm very happy to be finished, but to be completely honest, this took way longer than I thought it would, and I'm not 100% happy with it. But to become 100% happy with it, I'd probably have to spend way more time and maybe even start over. There's a few things I would do differently. Like, for example, I was planning to actually use some tape, put 2 layers of tape together facing each other, and then cut out a pattern and stick that between the 2 layers of cardboard so there was an inset. An insert? Whatever. I'll probably still use that idea for some future project. Just, you know, little details. You know how they say artists never really finish a project, they just abandon it. I'm not calling this art at all, but at some point you just gotta stop working on it. And as I predicted, I don't think this looks any worse than one made out of plastic. There's a few spots that white tape adhesive is showing, but probably the material cost ends up cheaper than the one I could have bought, and also it was a lot more fun to make. Actually, buying a plastic one probably would have been quicker. It would have arrived here, yeah, in way less time than I spent working on this. Part of that was procrastination. Part of it was I made a mistake partway through and had to undo what I had done, and that was a little disheartening. And part of it was thinking, I was gonna do a project a week and I'm just not getting anywhere near that kind of speed, which was irritating. I might end up making a few more designs of this just because I've got more wands to hold. Just not sure where I'm going to put this to display them. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you see, absolutely click on the subscribe button. Any comments or questions down below, please check out the links down below for Patreon and whatever else might be there. And I hope to see you back here for more cardboard, tape, and hot glue very soon.